In the shadowy corridors of laboratories and the silent pages of medical journals, there lie tales that have seldom been told. Tales of ambition that flew too close to the sun, of genius that turned into folly, and of innovation that, well, wasn't really quite that innovative. Welcome, curious minds and aspiring detectives, to Crimes Against Innovation. Today I have two guests who are going to tell me their crimes. I'm joined by America by Professor Chovatiya, Associate Professor at Rosalind Franklin University of Medicine and Science at Chicago Medical School and founder and director of the Center for Medical Dermatology and Immunology Research in Chicago, Illinois. Welcome, Raj.
Thank you for having me.
And Dr. Joe Rastrick, Head of Resolution of Inflammation Research at UCB. Now, together, we're going to take a light-hearted look at some of the most misguided, bad ideas and downright terrible innovations in the healthcare industry. My guests have both been asked to share what they consider to be a major crime against innovation. They're going to each set out their argument, and I have the dubious pleasure of being the judge and deciding which is the worst crime. So both of you, thank you for your nominations. So Raj, I'm going to ask you to start first. What do you consider to be a really bad crime against innovation?
Sure thing. I'm going to jump into my winning argument to tell you all about why there is a crime that didn't used to be a crime, but perhaps now is a bigger crime than anything else that you'll hear on this podcast. And that is the traditional academic model, the idea of when innovation really gets stuck in the system. So let me explain, right? As somebody who spent a majority of his life in a university system, training, working, educating, teaching, seeing patients, doing research, academia used to be this place that was open for exploration, creative thinking. You could really be somebody that was a model researcher, clinician, educator. And in today's day and age, that's actually quite hard to come by in a university system. Young faculty don't get the support that they used to. There's expectations for uncompensated labor, really all about how much dollars you bring into university. Individual liberty and exploration tends to be stifled. And there isn't that much support from the generation that's been there before, in part because they can't really understand what the current situation is like. Their perspective has been shaped by a very different time, and they're largely sort of protected in the position that they're at and don't necessarily have the same sink or swim type mentality. And so, really getting things done from a traditional university side is not quite as straightforward as used to be. And part of that challenge is the fact that in today's day and age, collaboration is huge. It's really hard to collaborate outside of university, especially in the private sector when thinking about industry. And so bottom line, academia, definitely in need of a reboot. I think it really needs to be thought of now as a state of mind and not specifically a place. And academic work can really happen almost anywhere and not simply within the four walls of a university.
So that's quite controversial. Is that because, post-COVID, do you think? Or do you think this is pre-COVID was the same?
I would say that this has been a trend that we've been seeing for a number of years, decades really, as we've really sort of seen difficulty in retaining a lot of good, young, talented faculty, expectations of research funding in universities, the amount of money they require to keep their coffers full, and really a lot of the antagonism that's kind of come from thinking about is a great example.
So, I hear what you say, Raj, and I sympathise. But do you also think that maybe the sort of idea of the academic triple threat, the physician, the educator, the researcher, is outdated, and the new system allows you to focus on one of those areas. So instead of being a jack of all trades, you can become an expert in one.
I might argue and push back and say there's actually very little to no support that's given for somebody that wants to educate, as it's largely expected to be out of the goodness of your heart and time. As far as seeing patients, that's the most lucrative thing that comes with the university system. And so many clinics that are part of universities are run very much like private clinics in a big business sense, where it's all about getting those rear ends in the seats. And as far as research goes, really most of your funding is taken off the top to keep the lights on, keep the internet running, and largely fill an endowment that's never really going to be touched. And so I would push back and say that perhaps the current system that provides individuals focus is not actually getting us to the goals that we want.
You're based in the US. Do you think that's a US specific problem, though, and that perhaps in Europe and the UK it's different?
There's definitely differences in the way university life is structured around the world. And so I'll be the first to say that this isn't necessarily generalizable to every university system. However, I do think that you find around the world the idea of true independence exploration without many of the pressures that I mentioned is a challenge many of my colleagues talk about facing, even outside of the United States.
It was depressing when you say that there's no support if you actually want to educate people. I must admit that doesn't sound good.
Especially when you consider these academic institutions were built around educating people, right? The universities and the heart of our sort of postgraduate and graduate education systems. And I hear you, Raj. I know from colleagues and friends who work in the academic environment that the pressures to publish are huge, and higher impact factor journals, getting the right data out there. That it comes to my crime in a way on which we'll talk about in a moment. But
well, I was going to say, because you're agreeing with him really at the moment. I mean, but I'm looking forward to see whether you can compete with this one.
Is there actually a little bit of a cause and consequence going on? Because I think some of the pressures in academia to get funding and the constant grants is really challenging.
I was saying, no, Joe's making a really good point. I think he's unfortunately showing that we're actually friends beyond this little tiff that we're having as far as our debate.
We could page it up.
Joe, let's see. I mean, you obviously agree very, strongly with Raj's crime. So
I wouldn't say agree. I think I sympathise, but I put it on the naughty step. Whereas what we're going to talk about now is, a Room 101 deserving crime.
Okay, tell us your crime.
So my crime for Room 101 is the irreproducible published study. So by that, I mean studies that are published in peer-reviewed journals, often high-impact, well-cited papers, that you try and reproduce, and you simply can't. And you speak to others and they say, oh yeah, we tried that, it didn't work. But the thing is, these studies sort of tend to lead you down a garden path. And sometimes the consequence of that is, drug targets that were never going to work to start with, wasted resources, wasted finances, wasted time. And the only reproducible piece of it is our elevated blood pressure in trying to get these things to work. And when you reach out and you speak to sometimes the authors, and let's be clear, I'm not questioning anyone's integrity. Often it's the fact that, oh yeah, we ran that experiment. The person who ran the experiment has since moved on. We've tried to repeat it, but that person just had green fingers in the lab and we've not been able to repeat it. Or the conditions used were so specific that they're not necessarily physiologically relevant. So yeah, you needed to incubate these cells at a humidity that's only found on Mars, for example. Or you had to do the experiment precisely at 6 minutes past 3. The challenges we face with these irreproducible published studies is significant. There was a Nature paper published, and it looked at 1,500 scientists, and over 70% of those scientists had encountered published studies that they could not reproduce. And over 50% of those scientists thought that it was a significant problem in the system. And part of that is coming to what we were talking about, Raj. Actually, it's the pressure on scientists to publish. And let's be real, you can't really publish negative data even now. We talk about it often and how valuable those negative reported studies are. It tells others what not to investigate. But if we put so much pressure on publishing only positive data, then it means that there's more pressure to get data out there.
It does make you wonder, though, doesn't it? If people can't reproduce a study, I know you said you weren't questioning their integrity, but one does question the integrity, surely. Wouldn't you agree, Raj?
I'd say that it's a mix, right? So, this is a very nice argument that Joe has come up with. It's simply just a sub-argument that comes out of mine. So really it is a secondary issue. But the point is that, there is a mix of good actors, bad actors, unintentional acting here. There is definitely going to be individuals that know what they're doing. There's others that really don't. And then there's going to be a good collection of the fact that we don't know how to adequately control so many of our experiments simply because we don't know all the variables involved. And therefore, it's very difficult to replicate findings when you can't account for all the variables.
But I think if you can't replicate that study,
well, how do you know
should
it
it be
was true?
published? Yeah. But, there should be a certain amount of rigor going into these studies that get published. I believe that there is, but sometimes all the information has to be given. And if later there's a reason why that study cannot be repeated, or actually the investigators believe, actually there's a problem with this study, it should be retracted so that others know not to pursue that line of inquiry anymore.
I mean, I loved your line about the fact that sometimes, you have to do the study, was it 3 minutes past 6 or 6 minutes past 3, or you have to be on Mars to do it. But I found it quite horrifying that you said that 70% of people said, or 70% of scientists couldn't reproduce somebody else's experiment, and 50% couldn't even reproduce their own, because that actually is going to have an impact on trust, isn't it?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, there's an element to this where science is very complex, is very difficult, and there are unintentional consequences of that, right? That it is difficult to reproduce data, sure, but to put it into a journal, I think it should be repeated numerous times with numerous different ways to be sure of what you're pushing out there. Because as I said, there is so much wasted resources trying to recapitulate data that cannot be reproduced. And sometimes then, if you reach out to the authors, it is like you're questioning their integrity. And that's not the intention, is just to get to the bottom and try and develop the system that they've used in-house. And so it is a little bit sensitive, but trying to question it is really important. And that's what we do in science. We question everything. And if we can't reproduce it, we're like, well, why not? And sometimes it is for a bit of a silly issue.
Well, I know the benefits of failure is something we're going to discuss on a future episode of Hypothesize That. Okay. So I think, thank you for flagging that one for me. So my choice now is whether it's the
cause or consequence, really. Do you vote for cause or consequence?
The reproducibility or no support in education. I think, as you say, basically, is it just one argument? And do I then just say, I think you've both highlighted very good crimes against innovation, and call it a draw on this one?
Well done.
Very amicable.
I think that's what I'm going to have to do, because you basically are agreeing with each other. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for giving me those. So that concludes today's episode of Crimes Against Innovation. A big thank you to our guests, Professor Chovatiya and Dr. Joe Rastrick, for compelling nominations and, well, I was going to say spirited debate, but I think they agreed with each other most of the time, didn't they? But either way, it's been a fascinating discussion. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Now it's your turn to weigh in. Head over to our social media pages and cast your vote. Did I make the right decision, or do you think one of those was a bigger crime than the other? Use the hashtag Crimes Against Innovation. Join the debate, see what others are saying. Thank you for tuning in. Keep questioning, keep innovating, and join us for our next podcast discussing crimes against innovation.